Hi y'all, it's me again. I'm continuing from my book, Secret Lives of the First Ladies. Let's go! Spacey. As a child, Hillary Rodham dreamed of becoming an astronaut. NASA wasn't exactly supportive. When she wrote a letter to the agency looking for advice as to how she should proceed, they responded simply that she shouldn't and that space was a promise of the male gender. Needless to say, she was appalled. About face. Hillary Clinton has long been a favorite target of the right wing, but she wasn't always a Democrat. In fact, it wasn't until her college days that she began leaning to the left. Back in high school, she was an ardent supporter of severe right-wing Republican Barry Goldwater. Ooh. Foster care. When White House advisor Vince Foster committed suicide in 1993, it focused a sort of attention on the Clinton administration that every presidential couple dreads. Vince Foster was a fellow Arkansan who, by all accounts, was something of a golden boy. He was handsome, intelligent, and one heck of a lawyer. He was also, according to his son, more than just a friend to Hillary Clinton, and had been since they both worked for the Rose Law Firm. Though definitive evidence of the alleged affair may never come to light, numerous Clinton friends and cronies have attested to the unusually close relationship Hillary shared with Foster before his death. Considering her husband's prolific habits with other women, the possibility that Mrs. Clinton may have sought comfort in the arms of a man such as Foster can hardly come as a shock. Based on interviews with Clinton insiders for his book, State of a Union, Inside the Complex Marriage of Bill and Hillary Clinton, former National Enquirer reporter Jerry Oppenheimer offers the possibility that Foster, upon joining the Clintons in Washington after Bill's election, suffered from a profound malaise brought on by the shift that White House realities brought to his relationship with Hillary. Whatever the truth may be, Hillary Clinton was loath to even discuss Vincent Foster whenever his name was brought up again. Photo op. Like most first ladies, Hillary Clinton was concerned with maintaining whatever privacy she could. Hence her concern when, while riding a bike one day along the Potomac, she was waved off the trail by Japanese tourists. It looked as if they were intent on getting a photo of the first lady and that her disguise of sunglasses and a baseball cap had failed. In fact, the opposite was true. They were merely looking for someone to take their picture. After doing so, she calmly rode off without anyone the wiser. Cool. I'm almost on to my last first lady. Yay! Rough start. That Hillary Clinton ended up winning a Senate seat at all in 2000 may seem extraordinary when you consider how poorly her campaign went at first. The trouble stemmed from two things: the fact that she was the first lady and that she was a person seeking political office. The result was a conflict of interest that at times could become a genuine predicament. When her husband, the president, decided to offer clemency to 16 Puerto Rican nationalists who had been jailed for committing crimes on behalf of the Fuerzas Armadas de Liberación Nacional, it became apparent to some, especially those who had been victims of FALN's violent crimes, that Bill was currying favor with the Latino vote on behalf of his wife. The accusation was stretched, but Hillary just complicated things later by coming out against the decision, and disappointing many in the Hispanic community who thought the pardon was long overdue. Then there was a trip she made to Israel. In fact, she made the journey as First Lady, not senatorial candidate, a fact lost on many Americans. While visiting Ramallah in the occupied territories, she calmly sat next to Arafat, Yasser Arafat's wife. Suha accused the Israeli army of using tactics involving poison gas. After failing to respond to the allegation, Hillary got up and warmly kissed Mrs. Era fat on the cheek. Back in America, the embrace was viewed as incredibly irresponsible. Mrs. Clinton emphasized her support of the Middle East peace process and claimed not to have heard the translation as Shu Ha Arafat's words, but the damage was done, particularly with the Jewish vote in New York State. Last chapter, yay! Chapter 39, Laura Bush. November 4th, 1946 through. Don't forget, this was published 2005, so she was still alive. I think she still is. Comment down below if she isn't, because I do not remember, like, at all. I was going through a lot. Anyways, let's continue. Married November 5th, 1977. Presidential husband George Walker Bush. Children Barbara Pierce and Jenna Welch. First lady 2001 through, I think it was 2005, 2006 when she had to step down as first lady. But comment down below if you think that's wrong, because I think it is, but I'm not sure. Astrological sign Scorpio. Damn it! Oh well. Religion, Methodist, Samba. Parents need to be involved and support teachers, whether it's providing a quiet space where their children can learn or baking cupcakes for Valentine's Day. Despite her experience as a librarian, First Lady Laura Bush had no problem with her husband's Patriot Act, which gave the government access to patron accounts and borrowing histories. When reporters asked Laura Bush what her concerns were upon becoming First Lady, she replied, "It's a major life change. I'm not particularly worried about safety. Privacy? I'm very worried about privacy." And she wasn't kidding. If there's one thing Laura Bush has done well since moving to the White House, it's maintain a low profile. Few of her 20th century predecessors were ever so good at avoiding controversy. She grew up an only child amidst the oil-spawned wealth of Midland, Texas, where her father, Harold Welch, made a good living in housing development. The placid ideal of her youth ideally came to a screeching halt when, at the tender age of 17, she was involved in a car accident that instantly killed a friend and classmate of hers. Understandably, the tragedy served to pull her back within herself. She had always been a bright and intellectually curious kid. Now, hurled into adulthood overnight, she developed a thoughtful earnestness that went hand in hand with a growing love for the written word. That connection to books shaped the next decade of her life. Laura was a serious student at Southern Methodist University, too busy with scoring high grades to join the protests that increasingly consumed her generation. After graduating with a teacher's certificate, she taught elementary school children in Dallas and Houston for a few years, went back to school at the University of Texas at Austin to get a master's degree in library science, and ended up working as a librarian in Houston and Austin. She had found her calling and she warmly embraced it. It wasn't long before she was also warmly embracing George W. Bush. After meeting at a barbecue in 1977 arranged by a mutual friend, the two hit it off almost right from the start and began a relationship that fired up very quickly into a mutual desire to get married, which they did just a few months after first setting eyes on each other. The explosive progress of their courtship soon proves that opposites attract. Just like me and my boyfriend. He's more outgoing, extrovert and whatnot. I'm more introverted, more to myself, more wanting to stay home and whatnot, instead of just going out and whatnot all the time. If Laura was serene, deliberate, intellectual, and introspective, her new husband was outgoing, recessive partier turned businessman who liked to jaw and joke more than read. But if members of both families were Bemused by the young couple's differences in temperament, they were just as impressed by the obvious electricity between them. Sorry for the noise outside. That's a gardener. I don't know if that's a regular gardener. No, that's my new neighbor. He's a gardener now, too. So anyways, yeah, that's why you hear that. Because he's a gardener. Laura had fallen deeply in love but at a price. A Democrat who once voted for the liberal-minded Eugene McCarthy, she now found herself part of the Texas Republican juggernaut that was the Bush clan. They welcomed her with open arms, but it was also clear that burying her own political views was in everybody's best interest. In fact, it was a reality to which the retiring Laura could easily adjust. Politics were George's promise, not hers, and her sense of devotion led easily to unconditional support. The first test came almost immediately after they were married, when George made a run for Congress. Laura performed admirably as a public speaker, only when she had to, for she had no desire to do it, a campaign helper. When her husband lost the election, it was back to the oil business. For Laura, the life of a housewife proved rewarding. She continued to read her treasured books and volunteered in local charities and civic organizations. One area of her life, however, remained unfulfilled. Both she and George had raced to wedlock partly because they both wanted children so badly, but like many young couples, they soon discovered that pregnancy was easier said than done. In 1981, they were in the midst of dealing with an adoption agency when, quite unexpectedly, Laura discovered she was pregnant. And with twins, no less. By the time Barbara Pierce and Jenna Wells were delivered by cesarean section on November 25, 1981, their poor mother suffered a debilitating pregnancy and lengthy hospitalization and the frantic fear of kidney failure. The pregnancy may have been hard going, but the Bushes had their eagerly anticipated children. Nobody was prouder than Granddad George H.W. Bush, then Vice President of the United States. In fact, the senior George Bush would go a long way toward fostering his daughter-in-law's political education by enlisting her husband's help in his campaigns. Laura caught her political stride as a relative of the Vice President and eagerly joined her husband in 1988 to help in George H.W.'s successful presidential campaign. Though just as intent as always on keeping her life and interest to herself, her beauty, vivacity, and simple charm seemed to personify the Bush clan's obsession with family values. She had definitely become an asset to the Bushes, especially to her husband. In 1994, after moving his family to Dallas, making a killing as managing partner of the Texas Rangers baseball team, George made a successful run for governor. Laura soon proved herself as a popular and always discreet political wife. Though she became active as a fundraiser for everything from breast cancer to the arts, it was toward the cherished subject of reading that Laura, like her mother-in-law Barbara, devoted most of her energies in Texas. In addition to promoting state literacy programs, she created the annual Texas Book Festival, a popular and successful event that raised plenty of cash for local library systems. But if being the governor's wife was a good old time, becoming First Lady was another matter altogether. As George bounced his presidential ideas off friends and advisors, Laura came out against the idea. In private, of course, becoming the object of national scrutiny was a true tailor-made example of the sort of thing she feared. Her husband went ahead with it anyway, and as always, Laura supported him 100%. She even delivered a rousing speech at the 2000 Republican National Convention. It ended up being one of the closest, most controversial elections in American history, but George won, and Laura found herself immediately challenged by privacy issues as never before. If she had different opinions from the president about topics like abortion rights, she wasn't going to make them explicit, especially in public. "If I differ from my husband," she once said to a reporter, "I'm not going to tell you about it. Sorry." It became something of a mantra. The First Lady maintained her sense of mystery even when her daughters, particularly Jenna, displayed a taste for college partying that threatened to put the notorious dad to shame. Her relationship with her daughters was a private matter, period, as was her belief that they had just as much of a right to act like young libertines as any other coed. Laura had her causes, of course. In addition to eventually turning Texas Book Festival into an all-American event on the National Mall. She continued to act on her passion for literacy and learning by holding literary salons in the East Room of the White House, in which writers and scholars were invited to discuss various genres, and by launching a national initiative to boost teacher recruitment. The New Teacher Project, as it was called, was shut to sight after September 11, 2001, by the efforts of a government at war. In the wake of the terrorist attacks against the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, the First Lady displayed heroic composure, purpose, and empathy, while the President attempted to shore up a stunned American people with Billy Q's rhetoric. His wife waded into responsibilities that may have been softer, but were just as vital. Laura wrote open letters to the youth of the nation, imploring them to confront their confused and horrified feelings. She went on the air to remind parents that turning off their television sets at a time like this might not be such a bad idea. She visited those who had been wounded by the attacks, and in Pennsylvania she consoled those who had lost loved ones on Flight 93, which had crashed in that state, thwarting the plans of the terrorists who hijacked it. Concerned about her husband's image, she even played a role in reminding him to turn down the saber rattling a bit, though she wasn't always successful. After U.S. forces invaded Afghanistan to take on the Taliban, Laura became the first presidential spouse to deliver an entire presidential radio address, an opportunity she used to discuss the rights of oppressed Afghan women, and while traveling abroad, she went on European airwaves to tackle the insanity, terrorism, and its nefarious influence on helpless children. Clearly, this was a First Lady who had risen to the occasion, who was leveraging the influence granted by the position. After her effective political appearances and speeches on behalf of women's rights and children's security, the country got a taste of her compassion and eloquence. They wanted more, and they were not to get it. The First Lady's forays into opinionated discourse were more the product of desperate times than anything else, and were quickly to become a thing of the past. Laura Bush had long ago become a silent partner, and things were going to change now. As the administration launched its controversial war in Iraq to destroy Saddam Hussein's sadistic Ba'athist regime, she faded even further into the background, and no amount of questioning by eager reporters could possibly pull out. A perfect example was President Bush's Patriot Act, one of whose stipulations was that government officials could investigate which books a particular reader in the United States had bought from public libraries. It's telling that Laura, a librarian with a keen appreciation for the freedom of intellectual curiosity, offered no comment beyond, "We are in a special time right now where we need to do everything we can to avoid another attack." When Laura decided that her February 12, 2003 East Wing Salon was to focus on poetry and mark perhaps the most dramatic clash between her husband's policies and what she considered the separate world of her comfortable first ladyship, it soon became obvious that most of the poets she was inviting to the event were vehemently opposed to the administration's war in Iraq. In fact, many of them were contributing to an anti-war anthology meant to highlight this opponent's agenda. The First Lady's reaction was simple and abrupt. She canceled the whole thing altogether, insisting that the salons were an appropriate forum for political conflict. And that was that. She had striven rather mightily to avoid the controversial arena that dominated her husband's job. So mightily, in fact, that she had ironically become the subject of controversy. And so it goes. In the end, Laura Bush seems to have brought the First Lady to full circle, adopting a role as a as the wife of our elected president. No more, no less. In being the very antithesis of her predecessor, Hillary Clinton, she has certainly proved at least one thing. That a First Lady's silence, however convenient or welcome, can sometimes be just as difficult as a First Lady who makes a ruckus. Is this always catch-22 or what? I don't know. The accident. It was just a few days after her 17th birthday when Laura Welch borrowed her parents' car in Midland to go to a party, and after blowing by a stop sign at 50 miles per hour, signed into a car being driven by a friend, Michael Douglas. Laura's friend, Judy Dykes, had been in the passenger seat of the Welch's car and was raced to the hospital along with Laura. Michael Douglas, however, was killed instantly in the collision. And a horrifying twist of fate, Michael's father had been driving behind him at the time and witnessed the accident. The police report is not clear as to whether Laura's blood alcohol level was tested. What is certain is that no ticket was issued for her going through the stop sign. Smoking! There's an old story told by members of the Bush clan that goes something like this. At their first meeting, Laura Welch was asked by the Imperial Bush matriarch, Dorothy Walker Bush, what she did. I read, I smoke, I admire, is what Laura reported to have replied. No, Laura denies having said exactly that. It was a short response that, according to her in-laws, endeared her to all and sundry, especially the smoking part. In fact, Laura Bush smoked cigarettes regularly until the early 1990s. Oh, nice. Laura the librarian. George Bush often joked that his wife's idea of oratory amounted to say, shh. Laura usually bristled at the ribbon she got for her husband for being a librarian. Perhaps because it struck a little too close to home. When they first met, Laura had already adopted the practice of organizing books in her bedroom by the Dewey Decimal System. So that's it for the book. Yay! Next I'm going to be reading the 1910s. I'm finally able to continue the 1900 series of America's Decades. So next I'm going to be reading this book. Okay? Now that I'm done with the Secret Lives of the First Ladies. Yay! So anyways, please subscribe, comment, and down below. And if you're on YouTube, please ring that bell notification so that you can know when I upload. And if you're on TikTok, please like and follow my videos. And on YouTube, let's get to 50 subscribers. And on TikTok, let's get to 50 followers. Because once I do that on both, I'm going to do something special, okay? So, watch out for that. And please pay for something on either my eBay and or my car, okay? Bye.